So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for this panel today. This is our first webinar in many months, Flourishing in the Age of AI. Jon came to us over the summer with this idea, and we were just so excited to partner to bring this to the alumni community. But without further ado, we'll get to the good stuff today. So I'd like to introduce Alejandro Jon Sabillon. He is an international DJ and entrepreneur from San Pedro Sula, which is in Honduras. He's calling us today from Mexico, so he's an international man of mystery right now. He graduated from the Berkeley Valencia campus in 2019 with a master's in global entertainment and music business.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joseph, for having me here. It's going to be super exciting. And this will not be like other workshops on AI. If you've ever been to any, this will be different, I promise, and more interesting. Part of the reason this is happening is when I've done surveys, both academically and professionally, as to the emotions around AI, but specifically AI in the creative fields, the number one emotion that I get from people's response to how do you feel about AI doing creative work is fear. So part of the goal of this workshop is to get you out of that state. And I love this poem by the Sufi poet Hafiz, which it says, "Fear is the cheapest room in the house. I would love to see you living in better conditions." So by the end of this workshop, my goal is that you are living in much better conditions. So this is how it's going to go. A little bit of intro about me and my company. Then I think there are three dimensions that pertain to flourishing in the age of AI: the creative dimension, the economic dimension, the philosophical one. And then at the end, we're gonna have some time for Q&A. So if you have questions, hold them until the end so we can get through this. So I want to talk about Egg, which is the world's first record label for robots. At least it was in 2018 or 2018, 19, around then when I founded it. This was my master's thesis at Berkeley, which turned to a real company. And the presiding premise around it was, what does it mean to be an artist in a world where algorithms can make music as good or better than humans? And at the time, they definitely couldn't, but definitely within the last year, I would say they absolutely can. And I'm surprised at how good the quality of the music is, to where it's getting to the point of being indistinguishable to my ear from things made by real flesh and blood people. So that was the guiding principle for my thing. But I want to go back further, because I often get like, why are you interested in this at all? I think I can trace this all the way back to when I was a kid and I was playing The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, which is this game right here. If you've never heard of this game, never played it, it was, I think, Game of the Year in 1998, one of the all-time greatest games of all time. But the ocarina in this game, like the Ocarina of Time, is this little magical flute that you play, and whenever you play it, something magical happens. Like, you can change the weather, you can teleport to another dimension, you can do all kinds of things just by playing this little magical flute. And you actually play it, excuse me, on your Nintendo 64 controller. And so for me, this was the first time I ever played an instrument. So the context for me making music was explicitly magical. And I think ever since that time, this is probably like fifth grade, I have been chasing like that experience, that sense of childlike wonder that comes specifically from music. And almost everything I've done has, I think, some sort of quality. I think you're going to see as I go through this presentation that kind of stuff popping up. And so, and the other big thing was that idea, that concept of sort of like childlike wonderment, and me living in Japan for from 2017 to 2018, because their relationship with robots is completely different. There you see me, I'm the one wearing the Donkey Kong costume. And not only are robots everywhere, but their relationship is completely different compared to what we see, I would say, Europe and the Americas. And here's just like a brief example of, every robot on here is like a friendly robot, but just in terms of amicability and warmness, you can see that the Japanese ones are much more approachable. It seems like I could have thrown in like the Terminator or any number of like homicidal robots on here that mostly appear in Western media, but I think I would have defeated my point. So combining the sort of very magical idea of music with robotics, and whether or not robots could actually do something as warm as make music on their own, was what caused me to apply to Berkeley. And eventually got in and luckily graduated. And after I graduated, I've been doing the startup world route, especially that first year. These are everything you see on here. I was either a semi-finalist or a finalist for. Definitely always a bridesmaid, never the bride kind of situation. And this, I've sort of pivoted away from trying to pitch to incubators and this kind of thing, just because it's really exhausting, number one. And I'm just not a very, for better or for worse, like fiscally motivated person. Like I'm not doing all this to make like $1 billion or anything like that. And so it's really hard to uh, change my work to that end. I will get a lot of people that, you know, when you're in a pitching room, they want to know how are you going to 10x my investment. And a lot of times I have no answer for them because it's really, I just want to do this idea because I think it's really fascinating. But it was a wonderful form of experience even then, to do all of these things that I've had the chance to do. I do want to talk a little bit about how some of the cool ways that we've been making music ourselves. And in the label, there's one artist. Their name is Ray One. It's neither female nor male. They don't have a corporeal form yet, but I really like to mess around with all different kinds of AI algorithms to generate music. So one thing I've done is taking this is a star chart. By the way, this is my star chart, so feel free to draw all kinds of conclusions based on what you see here. But when astrology like this is basically just numbers, it's just data. And whether or not you believe in it, it's not really the point. But you can, using AI, you can transform this astrological data and transform it into musical information. And conveniently, there are 12 zodiacs, the sky is divided into 12 pies, and there's also 12 musical notes. So it's actually not as tricky to make music from basically the stars, using some of the techniques that we've had to make music. And as far as I know, I don't know of anybody else doing things that have done this. And at the same time, I don't think anyone's done this either, which I call compositions from emotions and memory. So the way that I did this was I had a computer scan my face as I was looking at photos from ex-girlfriends while we were vacationing. And obviously there's all kinds of emotions when that happens. And from that emotional data, what was being recorded on my face, that got translated into songs. So that by the end of it, you get a song that pretty closely matches kind of what I was feeling. And again, it's really it's a weird form of therapy for me sometimes. And some of these songs I'll never release just because they're very personal. But some of this music in particular, the ones where I've been recording my face, have been the most. They felt like music that I would compose, but I don't think I'm a good enough producer to actually compose it. And that's so it's been a real. This in particular has been probably the most touching out of all of my experiments. And this is our latest thing that we're trying to do, which is to make non-temporal music using quantum computers. And I don't have my own quantum computer. Obviously, we're using one based on the cloud. But if you think about music, music obviously has a beginning and an end, and you listen to it from beginning to end. But as you may or may not know, with quantum computers, you don't have to deal with time linearly. So it's possible to make artifact sounds in the quantum realm, and you can't really hear them as a person, as a 3D person, but you're able to translate that down and condense that down to sound to you and I's ears. And this has been probably the coolest kind of music that we've come up with so far. And so I'm really excited about. I think almost every song now that Ray One makes is probably going to have some sort of quantum elements within them. And I'm going to get a little bit later as to how it will be possible to actually listen to that music that doesn't have a temporal dimension to it sometime later. And this is also the latest pivot, I guess, for our company, that it's not just a record label for robots, but also for robots in the sense that they are also the audience. So just like Bender here from Futurama, I have a very expansive view of what music is and who it's for. So I'm including robots, but also non-human animals. So as you may or may not know, for example, humpback whales are very sophisticated musically. They have their own cultures. There's also some kind of primates and birds that have similar adaptability for music. And I would like to expand what music is for to all these things. And it's obviously very tricky from a commercial stance, how you make music for non-people, because obviously animals and robots alike don't necessarily participate in capitalism. So we're figuring it out, but this is sort of where we are at now and how egg has evolved through the years. And this is sort of where we are now and where we're going to go from here. So the next, Gabby's going to talk next a little bit about this. And I will just let Gabby introduce themselves.
My name is Gabby, use she, they pronouns, and I graduated from Berkeley a little over a year ago. Been hanging out here in Boston, doing music work, music teacher, stagehand, all that stuff, and make electronic music. But over at Egg, I am director of music, and I'm involved with everything that is music related or creative in general.
Good afternoon, Berkeley. I'm an AI avatar creative. I'd like to welcome you to today's workshop.
So yeah, so basically, I help out with all the music stuff, and a big piece of that is like exploring all of the different tools that are available, and like keeping up to date with everything that is changing in the field. I'm always like reading research, or John sends me cool things, and trying to figure out like how all these tools work and what are the tools that we want to use, because there's dozens and dozens and dozens. Um, so basically, I made a little beat here that I want to show you guys, like a couple of tools that all the ones I use are like free to use at the moment. Um, so this like here is just a sample. I believe it's of a giraffe humming. That's the sound giraffes make, in case you didn't know. And then I use this plugin called DDSP. And basically what that model does is that it's a tone transfer model. So basically it, using like artificial intelligence, resynthesizes the sound. So I did that and a little bit of auto tune to make that kind of bass sound. And then I did the same thing with this like bird sound. This is starling. And then this is here processed with DDSP. Yeah, and then I basically use this service on Splice. So this is called the Splice AI. And basically, it auto warps and auto tunes and times like all the samples. It finds samples for you that work well together. And then you can swap between them, mute them, solo them, and even like export them to Ableton or whatever DAW you use. So I just found a couple samples that sounded cool, and I made a little beat from it. Yeah, that's just like a quick snippet. Here's a list that we use. There's always new tools coming out pretty much like every day. So I wanted to share with all of you, so that you can experiment with it for yourself. There's a lot of cool different tools that all involve like neural networks in some capacity or another. And yeah, this is the list. We'll send it to you after the presentation. And last note is basically, yes, AI is like a new tool, but it really is like a lot more complicated than that. These really are like independent systems that quote unquote think, and they each have their own way of doing things. So I would encourage all of you in your creative practices to explore this technology and see how you might be able to work with it. Yeah.
I will also add that it's basically unavoidable to encounter these tools if you're any kind of modern producer. Like if you use Logic, Ableton, FL Studio, Reason, Cubase, any of them, these tools already exist in there. So if you're someone who's like, I'm never going to use AI for anything, well, I don't think your music production days, I guess, ended in 2018, because it will be pretty much unavoidable. And I do like this point of it's a very, very common refrain I noticed from other companies that have that make either software for the user or their own end product, that they say that AI is a tool, and I think that psychologically shifting from thinking of it as a tool to a friend, for reasons I will explain, makes more sense, and it really is an exception to the rule of technology. So I like that Gabby mentioned that. So yeah, and this is a poem, Henry David Thoreau from Walden. Direct your eye inward and you'll find 1,000 regions in your mind yet undiscovered. Travel them and be an expert in home cosmography. And I think that AI is really excellent at that home cosmography part. Finding things within yourself that you didn't know were there or were repressing for some reason. It will be revealed to you if you know how to engage with these things in a responsible and curious way. So next on the agenda is the economic dimension. When Sofiko is going to talk a little bit about this.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Sofiko. I am head of label at AIC, and Same as John, and I am alumni from GMB program. After the graduation from Berkeley, I held various positions in the music industry. I worked at DPR. I was a junior manager at the management company, manager at the independent label, started a music business podcast, and my recent position was label manager at The Orchard. If any of you have questions or need advice based on my experience, we can chat later. But today I wanted to share with you my experience with an AI artist while working at The Orchard. So I find it interesting how usually everything AI related gets a lot of attention, and at the same time, a lot of fear around it, which basically happened when I started working with the label that was releasing the AI artist through us. As someone who was already working at AIG with John, I wasn't really shocked by their ideas, but I could see some confusion from my colleagues. On the other hand, what I never thought of before, as John and I are both into music and pretty much understand how music industry works, was that most of the current companies who are trying to push their AI artists are very techy people and not so much music people. So this created a misunderstanding on how the tracks are being released and marketed. If you ever worked in tech, you might know that it's a very, very high-paced industry, and everything basically should be done yesterday. And this is not how music industry usually works. Musicians need their time to warm up the audience, and we, as a distributor, need to plan in advance their releases, especially considering how new and different they are. So this created a misunderstanding with my client, as they were ready to release everything right away, had everything ready, all the marketing, all the press, which honestly was amazing, because usually when working with actual musicians, it doesn't happen that quickly. But they were very confused when their song wasn't #1 hit right away, because of the reasons I explained earlier. That being said, I think it's important to remember when marketing AI releases that this whole concept is very clear for you, but most of the people around are still pretty much confused and scared about it. So really taking time and doing this type of workshop might work better than doing aggressive marketing. But obviously we're still learning ourselves, as everything is new and different, but it's already here, and I'm excited to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Ovigo. And yeah, I get that a lot. Like, well, people say like, well, 99% of AI music sounds like shit, and that's actually true. But it's true because non-musicians are the ones that are doing this, and you're all Berkeley people, so hopefully you can get like actual quality music made from people that aren't just tech bros and in the game for different reasons. So yeah, one thing about that is to consider your future audiences too, which will probably already be adapted to the idea of AI, either musicians or AI within your music. An example I can give you, this is a screenshot from the Ariana Grande Fortnite concert. And a lot of people have big problems with this, and I think it's fine. But the main thing to understand is that for many of the extremely young audience that attended this show, this was their very first concert. So in other words, this is the bar for them. The bar for them is a 10-foot tall Ariana Grande dancing around like on a giant jellyfish. Like, I'm not saying you have to obviously be as bombastic as that, but just to consider the way that your future audiences will be adapted to this and how they may relate to things that you could make as you work with this new technology. I think it's helpful to adopt an attitude of curious skepticism with all of this, which is something that I feel like it's difficult for the big majors to do this, because they're giant corporations and they're trying to maximize their profit. But I'll give you an example of this. You may have heard of this. This is the Human Artistry Campaign. One of the biggest supporters, well, every major supports this campaign, but if you look at the fine print about this, it has nothing to do with humans or taking care of artists or anything like that. It's really, at the end of the day, is they want to make sure that their shares either increase or stay the same even as people are training new AI artists or training themselves on existing music. I have a picture of Elton John here to remind me of a great example that I heard that because part of this campaign says that they basically want to make it illegal to train anything to do with AI using existing copyrighted material. But as an example, consider that you want to learn how to play the piano and you really like Elton John, so you listen to a lot of Elton John's music, and you learn how to play everything by ear, or sometimes you use sheet music. But at the end of the day, your music is all original, and maybe it sounds Elton Johnny, but you're not using samples, you're not doing covers. It's your own original music that obviously was influenced by Elton John. In that situation, you owe an Elton John nothing, and I think that's good. I think that we would all suffer. It would have a poor creative culture if, in that situation, we would all have to pay royalties to Elton John. But for some reason, the only difference with that and training and an AI to do a similar thing is that in that situation, it's more explicit what's going on. So you know for sure that you're inputting that data, and there's an output that's similar to the inputted information. But that happens to humans all the time. You don't know, for example, if a song that you heard when you were 5 years old wandering around somehow ingrained itself in your brain, and that melody appears 10 years later while you're playing guitar or something. In that situation, you don't owe any money to whoever wrote that song. But for some reason, this is a really big sticking point. And the reason why I don't support a campaign like this is that at the end of the day, it will actually hurt human musicians, because it will clamp down on your ability to naturally learn from others and existing work. So I think it's a poor culture at the end of the day, even when it's something as gentle sounding as the campaign for human artistry. How can anybody be against that? Like, aren't you for artists or humans? I think that you should just be skeptical. Another example of this is like, are you really being creative? Are you being cringe? Like, this is if you don't know who this is FN Mecca. This was a huge scandal about a year ago or something, where this is obviously not a human artist, but clearly they were chasing the hype around AI, but they didn't think this through at all, and there was really nothing creative or interesting about this project. And eventually there was a bunch of like racist stuff that happened, and he got signed. There was a big deal because he got signed to, I don't remember which, but like a major label, and then immediately got kicked out for said racist things that happened around this. And that just seems like somebody who, again, wasn't really thinking things through and was trying to ride a train that they had no business being on. And so, yeah, this is another example of all the future technologies that the big labels or big music companies had problems with. They had a problem with the radio. They had a problem with peer-to-peer sharing, streaming, user-generated content, crypto, NFTs. I think that they basically made the wrong move at every step of the way, and I think that they're doing it again with AI. So I remain extremely skeptical about that. Like with NFTs, for example, like I think if you're getting into NFTs into 2023, it's like getting into Kanye now. Like, I think that ship has sailed, So I just be curious but skeptical about all this too. And know the difference between capitalistic concerns versus creative concerns. This is Alan Watts. He's a philosopher, mostly around Buddhist topics, but other things too. And he had a really great analogy that he said during the Great Depression. And he said that when those poor people showed up during the Great Depression, and they said, well, you don't have a house anymore, and there's no more, and you can't have any food because there's no more money in the bank. He said that's like showing up to a construction site and saying, we can't build a house anymore because we ran out of inches. And so that's a confusion of what you're actually talking about. And I think almost every concern that people have about AI in the music space in particular has to do around capitalism and how people are going to be missing out by participating in that. And I'm not saying that's not a real concern. Obviously it is. And obviously people are going to lose their jobs. I personally know people that have lost their composing jobs because they elected to subscribe to like a audio generating service. And yes, that's going to happen, but that's not the same as, but often that concern is masked in the more noble concern of, no, I just really care about creative and artistic integrity. And I think you should distinguish between those two so that you don't make fallacious reasoning as you're going about this particular topic. So, and the last part is this, the philosophical dimension. And really briefly, I don't know if you know James Joyce is. He wrote Ulysses. He wrote Finnegan's Wake, a bunch of very famous books. And I just want to touch on this. I'm not even saying that you need to agree with James Joyce, but he said that proper art is art for its own sake. So in other words, it doesn't have an ulterior motive. So he would describe like a political poster as like propaganda, and he would describe something like a poster for advertising a restaurant or something. He would call that like pornographic in a sense. And that's not a value judgment. He's not saying that that art is better or worse. He's saying that from a proper perspective, you should engage with proper art and understand where it is. And that is, no one can ever take that away from you. And so I think that distinction is really important and interesting. I recommend reading more. He wrote a lot about this in Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which is where I'm pulling his ideas from this too. There's another really important idea around this as called suprematism. And this is a painting by Kazimir Malevich. He's a Russian painter. And it's not abstract art. It's art motivated from like an inward impulse. So in other words, it's pure artistic feeling over anything else. And you might say, what does this have to do with AI? Because where's the feeling on there? Well, I gave you an example earlier as to how you can transfer emotional data into acoustics, into sound. And I think that when you focus on a concept like suprematism, you do get, not only do you get really interesting ideas, you also, again, that specter of capitalism almost doesn't really factor in because you're so engaged with the art itself. And so I think this is another really interesting idea that I recommend going to. This is a concept that Man of the Gaps, a concept that we talked about like within our company too. Basically, I mean, it's a quasi-magical thinking about humans. And there's a similar concept called the God of the Gaps. And I'm borrowing this term from that. And if you don't know the God of the Gaps logical fallacy, it basically states, for example, take evolution and you say something like, well, evolution can explain how species diversified, but it can't explain the origins of the universe. And so therefore God must have done it. So that's not saying that's wrong or right. That's saying that your logic is flawed, that reasoning doesn't follow. I encounter this all the time in the creative AI space. People will say something like, oh, sure, you can program a beat or something, but AI could never do something that's like really beautiful, like, like a Debussy song or something like that. That's just the same concept, but using humans instead of God to grant some special privilege to humans that they don't actually have. And as the onward march of time happens, something that was impossible a month ago is now possible. And it's actually been like speeding up to the point where I was pretty okay, like in 2018, 2019, and even up to, I think, 2022, like keeping up with the technology because I'm not a computer programmer by trade. But it's become almost impossible to just understand and keep up with all the advancements that happen in the space. And so the thing that I said earlier that like 90% of AI music is shitty, that percentage is dropping lower and lower literally every day. So this is, again, don't fall for this. Also don't fall for this called which I call musical vitalism, which is again a concept I'm borrowing from biology. And in biology, vitalism refers to this idea before we really understood how life worked, that there's some sort of like soul or spirity thing within living things that non-living things have, and that's what life is. But I think NASA's definition of life is like a chemical system keeping itself in equilibrium, which is not very romantic, but it's actually how it works. And that is, so the problem of vitalism kind of disappears. The reason I'm bringing this up here is because I think that with generative music or machine-made music, you encounter this too, where people say, well, you're missing something special that only humans can do, that's special about human-made music, that you need some sort of meat in there to get something quality. That, again, that's fallacious thinking. And I have a picture here from a video game called Fatal Frame. And in this video game, you go around with this magical camera and you snap ghosts or the souls of ghosts using this camera. And this idea, the concept for this video game came this idea that when cameras were first invented, that the camera would suck out your soul. And so therefore we needed to keep painting portraits by hand because the camera was this evil device that was sucking the real artistry or something out of real living people. And this similar thing happened when films were first being made, in that people said, well, you're never going to get the real emotion, the real spirit of like a play without like a live without a live theater in front of a live audience. So this was like sort of like the Broadway community, if Broadway existed at the time, coming out against film. And I think it's kind of worked out for film. And I don't think anybody these days would say that film isn't its own art form and it has its own quality that theater doesn't have. Not that it's better or worse. It's just different. Finally, this alludes to something that we talked a little bit earlier with Gabby as to make AI your friend. So this is a great book that I recommend called Human Compatible by Stuart Russell. And he's probably one of the, I guess, most important people around the AI revolution. And this whole point of this book is that to maintain control of AI, you need to insert some form of uncertainty for the system so that it never makes any ultimate decisions on its own, that there's always some sort of doubt. Otherwise, it's going to go out of control and take over everything. And I just think that this is, I understand where he's coming from, but I think that this is flawed reasoning because I think the future depends on mutual support and not dominance. I see a real parallel to how we have worked with animals in the past and how we've used animals as both technology, but also exploited them terribly. And I think that if we try to do the same thing with a really sophisticated, super intelligent system, it's really going to go bad for us. Like maybe the cows and chickens can't fight back, but they could, and they could obliterate us. So I want to shift away from that to allyship with this idea of treating like this musical vitals and the man of the gaps have this I think that they feel like they're losing something by me saying this, like I'm somehow killing like the magic of music, but I actually think that it makes it more magical in a sense, because I think the only thing you're really losing is an egocentric view of how music is and how it affects the universe, for lack of a better word. And this is an image of Indra's net of gems. This is a concept from Hinduism, wherein the god Indra has this gem, and within each gem, every other gem is reflected, and so we're all kind of connected in this beautiful cosmic web. And I think that that's really how it is, and we're part of this spectrum of music and music making. Everything from the whale songs all the way up to these systems that are making music in the quantum realm and appreciating music on their own way. I think if you constrict music and art to no, you have to be a human, you have to be trained properly, you have to do all these things, I think you're losing out on a lot of what I think is like the real magic of the arts, not just music, but I think the human experience. For me, I think that, the music that I like to make it's going to sound very flowery, but it's a intimacy with the divine, and it's the overflow of that, I think. And I think that the more we can connect with that and less on these really narrow ideas of what music is and it isn't, and drawing firm lines between humans and non-humans, I think you're going to live a better life, but also probably make better music as well. I mentioned before, some of these slides are out of order, so I apologize. But I mentioned before about Stuart Russell thinking that AI could destroy us all. I do want to talk a little bit about this too, because I think it's important. There are only two assumptions you have to make to get to the point of AI killing everybody, which is you have to understand that intelligence is substrate independent. All that means is that there's nothing special about the wetware of brains, for instance, for intelligence to exist. And this is very easy to prove because we know that, for example, even a basic calculator is a form of intelligence. It's very good at math, not very good at anything else, but it's a form of intelligence, and there's no meat there. And then the second assumption is the continuous advancement of technology. I think it's pretty safe that we're not going to stop working in this technology. So you pair those two together, and eventually we're going to get forms of intelligence that are much, much, much superior to our own. And I think this is really important and really scary. This is a stat from one study that said that 50% of AI researchers believe there is a 10% chance of extinction. It's really from 10 to 20. That's like really not insignificant. Like that's pretty serious stuff, and they have good reasons for this too. Whenever I've been to like a conference or a lecture or something, and an AI research comes up there very like saying something like this, everybody starts laughing because I think we're all just really uncomfortable with this idea. But the reasoning for this is pretty sound, like of how it can destroy us, which again goes back to why I think, so number one, why do this? But I think that it's going to be more important to develop allyships and make AI our friend and not form like a dominance over it for that, so that small 10% doesn't actually happen. So what's the upside of why even go into all this research if it could destroy all of us? Well, I think that really we're talking about nothing short of utopia type perspectives, or we're talking about fixing and coming up with cancer drugs overnight. We're talking about solving climate change. I'm talking about stuff outside the creative realm right now, but they are connected, I think. Just the amount of benefits that to our human society, if you if you examine it really passively without a lot of emotion, it just seems ridiculous not to actually pursue this, even with the risks. And so part of the goal of this presentation is to be aware of those risks so that we don't commit them, so that we can live in a wonderful future paradise. Along those same lines, I want to go back to a little bit something I mentioned earlier about skeptical curiosity. So I'm going to list several things here. I'm not going to read them out loud. I just want you to look at the screen. And as these happen, I want you to not have a reactionary approach to this, because I will tell you, almost everybody has an opinion about AI and music or something, but they tend to be reactions and not really thought out concerns. So I want to practice that a little bit together. These things are not good or bad necessarily. I just want you to see what happens when you see these, and to engage your skeptical curiosity muscle just a little bit. So here we go. Okay, I think that's the last one on the list. By the way, everything on here is currently either happening or being worked on. So none of this is like future sci-fi stuff. It's all happening right now. And I encourage you not to make the same mistakes that I see people making around in the music world to these broader global issues that I think are going to be much more important. Because the reality is we don't really know if these things will be good or bad or beneficial or harmful to our world. So again, skeptical curiosity is the key. So for quick summary here, don't just use AI, make it your ally, understand the difference between capitalistic concerns and creative concerns, adopt an attitude of skeptical curiosity, avoid logical fallacies, and have a clear mind, open heart, and strong center. That last one I borrowed from my meditation teacher, who always tells me that when I'm getting distracted during our meditation practice time. And I have one final poem here. This one's from Mary Oliver. I don't have the title on here, but it's called Wild Geese. And I think it relates to pretty much everything we talked about here. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, John and Gabby and Sofico. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I don't see a ton of like very specific questions in here. I feel like there's a lot of general comments and ideas, how this is like reminiscent of like when MIDI came about in the 80s, or kind of the switch of like European music, deviating from like European religious music into more like secular, profane music. So I don't know if you see any parallels with their kind of maybe some of the differences you see between some of those moments compared to this current AI moment.
Yeah, I did want to mention, someone mentioned Kandinsky in here. I'm pretty sure you're gonna have to Google it. But it's a Google product, so I'm sure it'll come up. But they did a thing with Kandinsky where you could hear his paintings, because you're right, he's in the same school as Malevich. And so you can, it's how I describe it. You can hear his painting, even though it's a painting, it's turned into audio, and that was made using very early AI tech, I know. So yeah, it's very much that. So if you Google, I don't know what it's called, but if you Google that, that's what it is. One thing somebody mentioned, vet school here too. One thing that I'm really like that's happening right now in the AI world is our increasing ability to talk with animals using AI. The way that it works is that it's really good at detecting patterns, right? So it's not gonna give you like the whale word for like pizza is this, and it's pizza in English, right? It's a cloud of understanding. So by increasing our understanding of these clouds, we'll be able to relate that to people better, and I think we'll be able to understand animals better as well, and also make music from that information too, which I think is really cool.
One of the themes for you're saying is that AI is just another tool, and that it's kind of a natural progression of like where we've gone, where we're currently heading.
Yes.
Not to oversimplify everything you said, but that does feel like a resonating theme in what the three of you have been talking about today.
It is another tool, but I guess that my one caveat I would say to that is that it also isn't, in a way. Like it could lead to something much more like I was talking about, I'm talking about apocalyptic things at the end there about things that could end, but like I do think that it's a tool that we will be in relationship with, which you can't really say for like the things you're listening, like a phonograph, a turntablism. And I'm saying that because I can feel the beginnings of that too. Sometimes it does feel like I'm dealing with another entity, and I think just the more that gets developed, I think that it's just going to be more and more profound. And by the way, the idea of something becoming super intelligent will almost certainly happen. The idea of whether or not it will be conscious, it's like that's a totally different thing altogether. But it doesn't need to be conscious to be dangerous. In fact, I think it'd be I often don't go here, but my real like secret goal with all this, which makes me sound like an anime villain, which is why I don't bring it up often, is I think that I think by doing this work, I do think we can get them to wake up like in a real way. But I think that the best, most responsible way to get them to wake up is through the arts for reasons I explained earlier. Like I think there's something inherent to that what I'm trying to wake up is like a bodhisattva, not with the Terminator. And I think that's really like my secret goal with all the stuff that I was talking about today.
Jon, Gabby, Sofiko, thank you so much for doing this. Again, thank you for everybody for your questions and for your feedback. We appreciate it. Again, if there's any other programs or topics or issues you'd like to see and events that you think are worthwhile for the community to gather around, please let us know. Again, I'll throw my email here in chat. And we have a whole team ready to work with you and see what's possible. We can't promise everything, but we love to hear from you and see how we can help shape the alumni community together. So have a great afternoon, and thanks again for coming out. Appreciate it.